So the Leadership Consortium owes its name and its origin from the fact that a consortium is in essence a grouping and a collective of ideas and thoughts. And it's embedded in the fact that leadership per se is not normally in the hands of one person. It should be a collective, it should involve different perspectives, it should involve a broad spectrum of what is possible from the leadership perspective. The Zenger-Folkman family of colleagues around the world represent a broad group of people who are playing in the leadership space. And our Australian colleagues, Terry Reynolds and Glenn Price, have done a magnificent job in putting together a set of podcasts that address the questions and the recipes within the Zenger-Folkman methodology. These podcasts represent step-by-step, short, bite-sized, normally about 3 to 4 minutes, ideas, concepts, and tips and tricks as to how we can build our extraordinary leadership. So our invitation is to enjoy these podcasts, squeeze as much value as you can out of them, and make it part of building your leadership stepway to extraordinary. The first podcast is an introduction into the extraordinary leader, and it is in this context that if we look at how South African leaders typically stack up against a global database, we are ranking number 3. Unfortunately, this is not 3 from the front, it's 3 from the back, which is very concerning. Our South African leaders are able to really punch above our weight, and one only has to look at the numerous examples we have in terms of how South African leaders have done quite this. Our challenge to you is to adopt, embrace, and use the methodologies that we assist with in terms of making your move into an extraordinary leader. At the Leadership Consortium, we provide the skills, we provide the frameworks and assistance in terms of allowing you to make this journey successful for your career.
Welcome to the Leadership Digital podcast series with Glenn Price and Terry Reynolds. Do you care about developing your leadership skills? You should care. That's why you've clicked on this podcast. By developing your leadership skills, you're assured of a more rewarding and successful career. You will make a greater difference in every organization in which you work. You will lift the performance of everyone who works with you. If you aspire to greater responsibility and the rewards that follow, then learning how to be a better leader is a necessary step to getting there. And that's what this podcast series from Leadership Digital is all about. Opportunities and rewards in your organization will surely increase if you're an effective leader. Now, your organization, whether it be a hospital, a government agency, a business, global organization, or a local school, needs you to be a strong and effective leader. For years, we've partnered with Zenger-Folkman to research leadership. And in this podcast series, we prove that there's a high correlation between leadership effectiveness and the results that leaders produce. Developing an adequate cadre of leaders to perpetuate their organization is the number one preoccupation of CEOs in today's large corporations. What's more, your organization needs you to be more than adequate in your leadership. While those who learn to lead get better results than those who don't, one startling conclusion presented in this podcast series is the huge difference between the merely good and the extraordinary leader. Unfortunately, the concept of leadership continues to be shrouded in misunderstanding. Ask 100 people to define leadership, and you're sure to get 100 different responses. So one objective of this podcast series is to provide a simple and practical definition of leadership. It is not based on the subjective impressions of the authors of this podcast series or even the researchers, but comes from solid empirical research. Based on analysis of over 78,000 leaders, this podcast series describes the 16 behaviors that differentiate the best leaders from the least effective. These are the behaviors that subordinates, team members, peers, and bosses notice. These are the behaviors that you should work on developing. Many leaders mistakenly believe that the path to greatness lies in finding their least effective traits or skills and then bringing those so-called weaknesses up to an acceptable range. These leaders believe that by removing these lower scores, they will then be perceived as much more effective leaders. Well, this podcast series argues that this is a grave misconception. Great leaders are defined by having a small number of real strengths. Exceptional leaders don't get there because they're flawless. And conversely, they're not exceptional leaders because they do 180 things remarkably well. This podcast series describes how the acquisition of certain strengths help make you an extraordinary leader. These strengths can catapult leaders into the 90th percentile, the very best of the best. Those people then make enormous contributions to the success of their organizations and their employees. So over the next 24 podcasts, we will create and provide you with the stepping stones that you can follow so that you can become and remain an extraordinary leader.
It's a pleasure to be able to share these thoughts and ideas with you and hopefully be part of allowing you to adopt a journey where extraordinary leadership is an opportunity and a growth area for you and your teams.